My daughter-in-law left her bag on my kitchen counter when she came to pick up my grandson after school. I wasn't trying to snoop. I wasn't looking for anything. But when the small black flash drive slipped out and clattered onto the tile, I picked it up, and everything I believed about my son's death fell apart. My son had been gone for 2 years. The doctors said his heart simply gave out. He was only 38, but they told us some men carry silent conditions for years without knowing. I had buried my only boy, consoled my grandson, and spent 2 years telling myself that God sometimes takes the people we love before we're ready. I had made peace with that, or so I thought. Before I tell you what was on that flash drive, please subscribe and tell me what city you're watching from, because the truth I uncovered in the weeks that followed will make you question everything you think you know about the people sleeping under your roof. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the kind of Tennessee day where the air still carries summer warmth, but the light has already started going golden. My daughter-in-law had rushed in from the car, still in her work blazer, smelling of coffee and perfume. She had Tyler by the hand, my 14-year-old grandson, backpack half-zipped the way boys his age always wear them. She dropped her bag on the counter the same way she always did, grabbed a bottle of water from my refrigerator without asking the same way she always did, and told Tyler to be ready by 6. Then she was gone, heels clicking down the porch steps. I heard the flash drive hit the tile before I saw it. It had slipped from the outer pocket of her bag and spun under the edge of the counter. I crouched down and picked it up, fully intending to set it on top of her bag so she'd find it when she came back. That was the plan. That was all I wanted to do. But her bag wasn't on the counter anymore. She'd taken it when she left, and the flash drive sat in my palm, small and ordinary and completely unremarkable. I looked at it for a long moment. My laptop was open on the kitchen table where I'd been paying bills. I told myself I would just check if it had a label somewhere inside, some document that identified it, so I could make sure it got back to the right person. I told myself that. I almost believed it. The drive had one folder on it. The folder was labeled with my son's name. My hands were steady when I double-clicked it. They were not steady a minute later. There were files inside, dozens of them. Documents, spreadsheets, and photographs. But it was the audio recordings that stopped my breath entirely. Dozens of recordings, each one dated, each one labeled in my son's handwriting style, naming the way he always organized his files with the date first and a short description after. He had been a meticulous man, organized to a fault. His wife used to joke, "I never thought that particular habit would one day save everything." The first recording I played was from 14 months before his death. I heard my son's voice calm, measured, the same voice that called me every Sunday morning, and I heard him say that he believed his wife was poisoning him. I had to play it twice before the words arranged themselves into something my mind could accept. He spoke quietly, the way a man speaks when he's afraid of being overheard. He said he had started keeping a record because he didn't know who else to tell, and he wasn't certain enough yet to go to the police. He described symptoms that had begun the previous spring, nausea that his doctor attributed to stress, a persistent tremor in his hands that came and went, vision that blurred at the edges in the evenings. He said his wife had taken over managing his vitamins and supplements after his first cardiac episode, insisting she wanted to help. He said he had found, by accident, that the capsules she gave him each morning were not what the bottles claimed. He had sent 2 of them to a private lab using a name he'd borrowed from a college friend. He was still waiting on results when he made that recording. There were 11 more recordings after that one, spanning the following 8 months. I listened to all of them that afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table while the Tennessee light shifted from gold to orange to the deep blue of early evening, while Tyler did homework in the next room and had no idea his grandfather was coming apart at the seams. The lab results appeared in recording 3. The capsules contained a compound used as a rat poison, an anticoagulant, something that thins the blood over time, something that mimics certain natural cardiac conditions when administered slowly enough. My son had been a financial analyst, not a chemist, but he had understood the report well enough to know what it meant. He had also, by that point, found the emails. His wife had been seeing his business partner for 2 years before his death. The emails were not romantic in the way most affairs are. They were not love letters. They were logistics. They were practical and cold, and they discussed timelines. They discussed the life insurance policy my son had taken out when Tyler was born. They discussed the house, which my son owned outright because I had helped him with the down payment when he married. They discussed waiting. They discussed patience. They discussed making it look natural. My son had collected all of it. He had been building a case, quietly, the way he did everything methodically, carefully, without telling anyone because he was afraid that going to the wrong person would accelerate what he already knew was coming. The last recording was made 6 weeks before his death. He sounded exhausted. He said he was going to take everything to a lawyer the following Monday. He said that if something happened to him before then, he needed someone to find this drive. He had hidden it in a book on his office shelf, a copy of Steinbeck that had belonged to his grandfather. His wife had cleared out his office 8 months after his death and donated most of his books to a library sale. The Steinbeck must have come back to her somehow. Perhaps she bought it back herself at the sale. Perhaps a neighbor returned it not knowing what it held. It didn't matter how it had come back to her. What mattered was that she had it. And now I did. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after the last recording ended. The room felt different. Everything in it looked the same. The photographs on the refrigerator, the coffee mug Tyler had painted for me in 2nd grade sitting on the windowsill, the yellow curtains my late wife had sewn the first year we moved in. All of it the same. All of it changed. Tyler appeared in the doorway asking if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just tired. I told him his mother would be here soon. I watched his face, his father's face, the same jaw, the same dark eyes, and I felt something harden in the center of my chest that I recognized as the exact opposite of surrender. I removed the flash drive from my laptop and put it in my shirt pocket. When my daughter-in-law knocked at 6, I opened the door and told her Tyler was ready. I watched her smile at me, that practiced, warm smile she had shown me for 11 years, and I said nothing. I needed time to think. I needed to know what I was doing before I made a single move, because my son had made the mistake of being careful and methodical, and it had cost him everything. I was not going to make the same mistake in the same way. I called a lawyer that night. Not a family attorney, not someone who handled wills and property disputes. I found a criminal defense attorney who also had experience working with law enforcement on complex cases, because I did not yet know which side of a courtroom I might end up on. That instinct turned out to be right. 3 days after I found the drive, a detective came to my house. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of alert stillness that good investigators have. She introduced herself, showed me her badge, and asked if she could come in. I said yes. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had listened to my son's recordings, and she told me that they had received an anonymous tip regarding my son's death. The tip suggested it had not been natural. The tip also suggested that I had known about my daughter-in-law's affair and had taken action. I understood immediately what was happening. I had been patient and careful for 3 days, and I had still been outmaneuvered. Someone had watched me, or my daughter-in-law had noticed the flash drive missing from her bag and understood exactly what it meant and exactly what her best available option was. The detective watched my face as she said it. I had spent 40 years as a high school history teacher, and one thing that career gives you is the ability to keep your expression neutral when a classroom full of teenagers is trying to read you. I kept my expression neutral now. I told her I understood. I told her I would cooperate fully with everything she needed. And then I told her that I had something she would want to hear. I played her the recordings on my laptop, every single one, and I watched her face change as my son's voice filled the kitchen. The same kitchen where he had done homework as a boy, where he had eaten birthday cake, where he had brought my daughter-in-law for the first time and told me she was the woman he was going to marry. By the time the last recording ended, the detective was very still. She asked me how I had come to have the drive. I told her the exact truth. She asked if I had made copies. I told her yes, I had emailed everything to my lawyer the same night I found it, and my lawyer had already made additional secure copies. She asked me not to contact my daughter-in-law directly. I told her I had not done so and did not intend to. When she left, she said she would be in touch. I believed her. What followed was 3 weeks of the most difficult waiting I have ever done. The detective was conducting her own investigation, working with forensic accountants and toxicologists, quietly pulling records. My lawyer kept me informed of what was permissible to share with me. I went about my days as normally as I could, picking Tyler up from school twice a week when my daughter-in-law asked, sitting with him at the kitchen table while he ate, watching him grow thinner and quieter in ways that broke something in me I didn't have words for. On a Friday evening in October, my daughter-in-law called and asked if Tyler could stay with me for the weekend. She said she had a work trip. Her voice was light and ordinary, and she thanked me in that way she always did, warmly, the way someone performs warmth when they have practiced it long enough that it becomes second nature. I said, of course. I told her Tyler was always welcome. I called the detective the moment we hung up. She told me to keep Tyler with me and to call her immediately if my daughter-in-law made any unusual contact. I asked her directly if my daughter-in-law knew the investigation was active. She said she could not confirm that. Her tone confirmed it. Saturday morning, I received a text from an unknown number. It said, "You should have left it alone, old man. You have until Monday to hand over the drive, or Tyler learned some things about his grandfather that no boy should know." I photographed the text and sent it to the detective and my lawyer within 2 minutes of receiving it. Then I sat down across from my grandson at the breakfast table and looked at his 14-year-old face, still so soft in the places his father's face had been soft at that age, and I told him I needed him to trust me for a few days. He looked at me the way teenagers look at adults when they know something is wrong but are choosing to believe that the adults are handling it. He said, "Okay, Grandpa." He went back to his cereal. I was not going to wait for Monday, and I was not going to hand over anything. The detective moved faster than I expected. By Saturday afternoon, she had a location, a rented lake house 2 hours east of Nashville, registered under my daughter-in-law's maiden name, paid for in cash. She had connected my daughter-in-law and her accomplice through 3 years of financial records, wire transfers to an LLC, payments from the life insurance settlement, joint purchases at addresses neither of them should have shared. The accomplice was not my son's business partner. That had surprised me when I learned it. The business partner had been a cover someone my son had initially suspected but who had nothing to do with it. The actual partner was a man my daughter-in-law had met at a real estate seminar 4 years ago, long before my son began showing symptoms. I drove to the lake house alone because the detective told me to stay home, and I did not listen to her. I told myself I needed to hear it directly. I needed to look my daughter-in-law in the face and hear her explain it in her own words, not through recordings, not through a lawyer's summary, not in a courtroom. I needed that the way I had needed to sit with my son's body at the funeral home before they sealed the casket. Just the two of us, one last hour. Some things a man has to do for himself. I parked where the tree line started and walked the last quarter mile on foot. The lake house had lights on inside. 2 cars in the gravel lot, my daughter-in-law's SUV and a silver truck I didn't recognize. Through the window, I could see them at the kitchen table, bent over a laptop. I moved to the side of the house where a screened porch faced the water, and I could hear them clearly through the old wooden screens. She was talking about the will. My son's will had been structured to ensure Tyler's inheritance was protected in a trust until he turned 25, with me named as trustee. This had apparently been the central problem for 2 years. The money was there but untouchable as long as I was trustee. What they were discussing, in the particular flat and practical tone that I recognized from the recordings, was how to change that. The man with her had a legal background of some kind. He was explaining options. She was nodding and making notes. I had heard enough. I stepped around to the front door and knocked. The silence inside the house lasted about 4 seconds. Then footsteps, and the door opened, and my daughter-in-law stood there with the expression of someone who has just seen a ghost and is deciding very quickly whether to run or hold still. She chose to hold still. I told her I had heard enough. I told her I knew about the man at the table, about the LLC, about the compound and the capsules. I told her I knew that my son had known. I watched her face move through 3 different calculations in the space of a breath, and I watched her land on the one she always landed on: the performance of innocence, the warm voice, the steady eyes. She said I didn't understand. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said my son had been sick, that she had done everything she could, that grief had clearly affected my thinking. She said this with the same fluency someone speaks their native language. The man from the table appeared behind her. He said nothing. He was evaluating. I told them both that the detective had the drive, the recordings, the financial records, and the text message from that morning. I told them that the detective also knew where I was, because I had called her from the tree line before I walked up. I told them that the only question remaining was whether they wanted to be arrested here at a rented lake house on a Saturday night, or whether they preferred to drive back to Nashville and handle it differently. The man sat down on the porch steps and put his head in his hands. My daughter-in-law looked at me for a long time. The warmth left her face the way warmth leaves a room when someone opens a door in winter quickly, completely, as though it had never been there at all. What was underneath it was not the anger I had expected. It was exhaustion. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been maintaining a very heavy construction for a very long time and has finally been told they can put it down, she said. He was going to take everything from me. I told her my son had loved her. I told her he had spent months trying to be certain before he went to anyone, because he had not wanted to be wrong about her. I told her that the recordings made clear he had still, even while building his case, been hoping he was wrong. I do not know why I told her that. I think I needed her to understand the size of what she had thrown away. 2 patrol cars came up the gravel road 7 minutes later. I watched them take her in the lights of the lake house. Tyler's mother in handcuffs on a Saturday night in October, and I felt nothing that I had expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not relief, something closer to the feeling of finishing a very long task that needed doing, hollow and necessary at the same time. Tyler stayed with me that night, and for many nights after. The trial took 4 months. I will not pretend it was simple. My daughter-in-law's attorney tried several approaches, suggesting the recordings were fabricated, suggesting my son had created them as leverage in a marriage dispute, suggesting I had found the drive before his death and had been concealing evidence. Each argument collapsed under the weight of the forensic evidence. The toxicology reports exhumed from my son's autopsy tissue samples, the financial trail spanning 38 months, the testimony of the lab technician who had received my son's original sample submission 2 years before anyone else knew anything was wrong. The accomplice accepted a plea arrangement and testified against her. He was, in the end, exactly the kind of person you might expect to find at the center of something like this, smart enough to construct the plan, not smart enough to understand that plans built on other people's deaths have a particular structural weakness. They are built on the assumption that the dead stay quiet. My son had not stayed quiet. On the day of sentencing, I was given the opportunity to speak. The courtroom was full reporters, neighbors, people from my son's office who I hadn't seen in 2 years. Tyler in the front row between my sister-in-law and the school counselor who had been working with him since the fall. I stood at the podium and looked at my daughter-in-law, who was looking at the table in front of her. I said that my son had spent his final months alone with knowledge too heavy for one person to carry, afraid to tell his family, afraid to move too fast, trying to be fair to a woman who had already decided to kill him. I said that the recordings he made were an act of love, love for Tyler, love for the truth, love for the idea that what happened to him should not go unaccounted for. I said that my son had trusted people carefully and completely, and that this had been both his greatest quality and the thing that had made him vulnerable. The judge sentenced my daughter-in-law to life in prison. The accomplice received 22 years. Tyler did not cry in the courtroom. He had cried in my kitchen the night I finally told him the full truth, 2 months before the trial, because he was old enough to deserve the truth, and I was not going to let him hear it for the first time from a news report. He had sat very still at the kitchen table, the same table, always that table, where everything in this family seems to happen, and he had listened to all of it. And then he had asked me one question. He asked if his father had been scared. I told him his father had been many things in those final months. But the recordings did not sound like fear. They sounded like a man making sure he was not forgotten, making sure the truth outlived him. They sounded, I told Tyler, like his father. Tyler nodded and was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if he could stay at my house that night. He has had his own room here ever since. His aunt, my son's younger sister, moved back to Nashville to help, and between the two of us and a very good school counselor, Tyler is moving through something that no 14-year-old should have to move through, doing it with more grace than most adults could manage. He is taller now. He has started running cross-country, the same sport his father ran in high school. Some mornings I watch him from the porch as he heads down the road at 6:30 in the gray early light, long-legged and steady, his father's stride exactly, and I have to hold the porch railing until the feeling passes. The house is quieter than it used to be, but it is an honest quiet, no performance, no warmth that turns off the moment the door closes, no calculations happening behind the eyes of someone smiling at me across a table. Just a grandfather and his grandson and Tyler's aunt and whatever we are becoming together, which is something I do not have a name for yet, but which feels, slowly, like family. I planted a tree in the backyard this spring, a red maple my son would have liked. Tyler helped me dig the hole and set the root ball and pack the soil back in around it. He said, standing back and looking at the sapling, that it didn't look like much yet. I told him that was how trees worked. You put them in the ground for the future, not the present. You plant something because you believe the future is worth planting for. He seemed to think about that. Then he handed me back the shovel and said he was going for his run. I watched him go. The morning was cool and the maple was small, and the sky was the deep, clear blue that Tennessee does better than anywhere else on earth. I stood there for a while with the shovel in my hands, thinking about my son, who had been organized and careful and loving and afraid, and who had trusted that the truth would eventually be stronger than everything arranged against it. He was right. He was right about that. There are 3 things this experience taught me that I carry with me every day now. The first is this: when something feels wrong about the people closest to you, trust that feeling. Not to act rashly, not to accuse without evidence, but to pay attention, to notice. My son noticed. He documented. He was careful when carefulness felt like the only tool he had. That careful attention is the reason Tyler knows the truth about his father. The second is that truth has a way of surviving that lies do not. My daughter-in-law had planned for every contingency, except the one that mattered. She had not planned for my son's voice, recorded on a flash drive, outlasting her. The truth was patient. It waited. The third is the one I think about most. Real family is not built from performance. It is not built from warmth that switches on when someone is watching and off when they are not. Real family is built from the kind of love that leaves recordings behind, that names a grandson's grandfather as trustee, that spends its final months not in anger but in hope that it might be wrong. That is the kind of love that survives. That is the only kind worth building. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you had found something like that flash drive, would you have listened to what was on it? And please subscribe to our channel for more true stories about family, justice, and the courage it takes to seek the truth when everything around you is asking you to let it go.